Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
As President Trump weighs the idea of deploying the National Guard to other U.S. cities to mitigate the nation's crime crisis, some Democrats appear to have taken heed, with Maryland Governor Wes Moore announcing Friday that the Maryland State Police would bolster the Baltimore Police Department in an effort to crack down on crime there. Governor Moore's announcement came shortly before footage was released from the August 22nd fatal stabbing of a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee in North Carolina on the Charlotte Light Rail, which President Trump reacted to earlier today.
She was slaughtered by a deranged monster who was roaming free after 14 prior arrests. We cannot allow a depraved criminal element of violent repeat offenders to continue spreading destruction and death throughout our country. We have to respond with force and strength. We have to be vicious just like they are. It's the only thing they understand.
In other news, Israel has called for a full evacuation of Gaza City as the IDF prepares to launch a military takeover of the region, a plan which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has claimed is the fastest way to end the war. That, plus Israel has attacked leaders of Hamas inside Doha, Qatar, getting condemnation from the Gulf states and around the world. To discuss this and more, let's bring in our panel. Editor of townhall.com, Katie Pavlich, CEO of Schoen Cooperman Research, Carly Cooperman, and Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram. Chad, a lot happening all at once, it seems. The biggest, I guess, internationally is this Israeli attack on Hamas leaders, negotiators, inside Doha, Qatar.
Yeah, when you have these types of moments in Washington, D.C., it's almost like you need the red zone for Washington, D.C., where you can see all the different things that's happening at once like they do for the NFL on Sunday afternoon. Absolutely. We just learned here that House Speaker Mike Johnson is being briefed on this. And again, this comes, a couple of years into the war between Hamas and Israel, where people are trying to figure out just how stable the Middle East is. This is pretty early. This is one more, fly in the ointment here. This is another problem for President Trump, as he, talked about that, he could get this settled. He talked about getting conflict between Ukraine and Russia settled. Foreign policy issues tend to have a way of creeping in when you're doing other things, meaning they are wrestling with crime in Washington, D.C., and North Carolina and elsewhere. They are wrestling with the Epstein files on Capitol Hill. They have to fund the government. There's a big debate about vaccines and the testimony last week by RFK Jr. But foreign policy has a tendency to creep in. And we haven't had a lot of reaction from Capitol Hill beyond just the fact that the speaker is going to be briefed about that. But if this intensifies in the coming days, you can bet now that Congress is back in session that will very quickly move up the list as being one of the primary issues that they're wrestling with.
Yeah, I mean, this comes, Katie, as there were negotiations ongoing. One of the negotiators that was talking to the White House and Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff was apparently the target of this Israeli strike. The Hamas leadership put out statements that those negotiators survived.
These same, quote, negotiators have been rejecting every single peace deal that the Israelis and the United States have agreed to for months and months, and they're still not requiring Hamas terrorists in Gaza to turn over hostages. And just on 2 days ago, the president put out on Truth Social that this was his last warning to Hamas. And now we have on Tuesday this strike being carried out by the Israelis on Hamas headquarters, not in the Gaza Strip, but in Qatar. And this war cannot come to an end until Hamas leadership is eliminated, until this terrorist regime surrenders, which is why you're seeing this strike today, and why you're also seeing the Israelis move into Gaza City to try and push some more pressure on this group to release the hostages. So far, Hamas leadership, which was made up of billionaires who over the years have stolen number of dollars in American aid and European aid to enrich themselves while they use the people of Gaza as human shields, they never thought that they would be a target in Qatar. They live in 5-star, 6-star hotels and thought that they were untouchable, putting themselves under this guise of being negotiators that continue to reject peace deals. So this move today by the Israelis and the careful statement that the White House put out about the unfortunate strike needing to be in the middle of Qatar because that's where these Hamas leaders decided to plant themselves, with the benefit of the Qatari government playing both sides of this issue for many years. You know, the president during his first term was very clear about Qatar spending a lot of time funding terrorism, which they've been doing for decades. So this is just one more step in both the White House and the Israeli strategy to bring this war to an end by eliminating the threat of Hamas.
Yeah, Carly, turning internally here and the issue of crime and fighting crime, you heard what I said about Governor Wes Moore in Maryland kind of stepping up in Baltimore. And this does come as this video surfaces of this attack and killing in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the president is talking about that, putting out a statement today about it on camera. How does that affect things and how each one of these Democratic-run cities or states reacts to this moment?
Yeah, look, I think that we see, broadly speaking, voters say that they're opposed to deployment of the National Guard in cities, though this has been like a lot of great red meat for Trump's base. You've got like 85% of Republicans who are supportive of it, and 89% in the poll that just came out said the Republicans believe it's going to reduce crime. You've got majorities of independents and Democrats opposing this. And so what's happened, though, is as a result of Trump's increased focus on crime and bringing it to the national forefront, is that it's also raised it as an issue of importance for Republicans. So it's now creeping up in terms of the most important issue. Republicans in polling will say that they use crime and immigration as metrics to judge President Trump on how they think he's doing, as opposed to the economy and inflation. And so I think that what we're seeing is that it's Trump wants this to be the conversation, whereas he was elected in large part because of his conversation around the economy and inflation, which his ratings are much lower on. So it's raising this conversation and taking a distraction off of the economy and inflation, where he's still struggling and where the tariffs have done anything but create calm in that area. And from Democrats in cities, you're seeing opposition. You're seeing this as an opportunity to stand up to Trump and to take on Trump. And, I think Democrats who are eager and, anxious, if anything, to see more opportunities to stand up to Trump and take on Trump are largely in alignment with disagreement about Trump's approach to this.
Yeah. Chad, how does it fall on Capitol Hill? What's most important as, it's always jockeying for the political issue of the moment?
Yeah, obviously the Republicans, especially in the House of Representatives, and Steve Scalise, the majority leader, has talked about moving crime legislation, maybe specifically for Washington, D.C., but for other places. And this is probably only amplified after what happened in North Carolina. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, Republicans think that this is a winning issue for them. They believe that they might have Democrats on their back heel when it comes to crime, especially with their resistance to putting the National Guard in Washington, D.C. The Speaker says that he doesn't think that they'll need to even have a vote regarding an extension of the National Guard in Washington, D.C. And there's kind of mixed, messages here in Washington, D.C., where the mayor, Muriel Bowser, has said, she doesn't like the federal takeover, but appreciates the help. And, she's getting an earful from her left right now, saying, maybe she's not the right person to be mayor. But I'll tell you, the two things that are going to start to gel in the next couple of weeks here, they have to fund the government by October 1st. So that comes sooner rather than later. And what that looks like is anybody's guess right now. I think that they will decide that at the very last minute. And they're waiting to see what President Trump and how he weighs in, even though we have had him weigh in before, both in his first term and last year, where they thought they had an agreement and it blew up. It was blown up by the president in 2018 going into 2019, which caused quite a lengthy government shutdown. And it was blown up by Elon Musk. House Speaker Mike Johnson was kind of thrown under the bus last Christmas. We don't know what the Republican ask is going to be. We don't know what the Democratic ask is going to be. Remember that Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, basically helped Republicans avert a government shutdown in March and got nothing for it. I talk a lot about Muriel Bowser and her criticism, the criticism directed at her because she's being viewed as being too much in league with the president. The left is certainly unhappy with Chuck Schumer there. You don't so much have Democrats and Republicans fighting, although you will, but you kind of have Democrats fighting Democrats on this. So that's going to be one thing. The other thing that's certainly going to rise to the fore here is how they deal with the Epstein files. And does that complicate funding the government? I'm going to give you a couple of little surprises here. As you always know, it's about the math. Right now, they are at 216 signatures for this, what's called a discharge petition, where they can go over the head of the speaker and compel the House to vote on forcing the DOJ to release the unredacted Epstein files. This is the resolution by Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky. Probably by tonight, because it's a Democratic district, James Walkinshaw will probably win to succeed Jerry Connolly, the late congressman from Northern Virginia. Well, that adds another vote on the Democratic side. And then on the 23rd of September, Adelita Grijalva, who is the daughter of Raul Grijalva, who died earlier this year, is probably going to win a special election in a very Democratic seat in West Virginia, in Arizona. So you have this, again, shrinking GOP majority. That if Grijalva wins and Walkinshaw wins, they could very well sign this discharge petition, and that gets you to 218. And that puts Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, in a very tough position because they probably have to either come up with a compromise or figure out a way to finesse their way around this, or that alone could really force a problem funding the government, because the reason that Mike Johnson sent everybody home a day early in July is that the House was absolutely paralyzed moving other legislation because of the Epstein files. That could potentially imperil the funding of the government this fall if they don't work that out. As I say, it's always about the math.
Panel, we'll hold it right there. Katie, the White House is adamant that this latest letter, the birthday greeting that originally they said was made up, now has been produced by the Epstein estate through the House Oversight Committee. They say the signature on there is not the president's. He didn't do it, and it's still all a hoax. Pressed about that numerous times in the White House briefing. They're saying the hoax is the Democrats hoping that this issue can be used to attack the president. But clearly, it's causing a rift and concern inside MAGA world, not just one side of the aisle.
Yeah, it's certainly a topic that the White House would prefer not to be talking about, and something they've tried to get away from, and a newly found political argument that Democrats are trying to make, despite the idea that the White House has said if there were something that truly implicated President Trump, that the Biden Department of Justice, which has a lot of this information, would have released it during the election to try and prevent President Trump from being elected on this issue. Quite frankly, when it comes to the midterm elections and the politics of this, I think if Democrats want to shut the government down over the Epstein issue, which is one they didn't show much interest in until they could use it as an argument against the president, and if you look at the number of concerns like crime and the economy that Americans have, I think Democrats will actually find themselves on the wrong side of what people actually care about and what they want to hear about when it comes to who they should elect to be in control of the House of Representatives. So politically, I'm not sure it's the right door to be knocking on, and it won't necessarily bear the fruit that they're thinking it will.
And Carly, what's your thought on that? I mean, I think it's easier to see a trap in the crime issue, much like we saw on the border issue and how Democrats dealt with that and talked about it. On the Epstein issue, I can't get there yet as far as the implications politically and how far Democrats and maybe some Republicans go down this road.
I don't think that the Democrats are going to throw all of their eggs into this basket. I think they're happy to let it be a distraction. And let Republicans, as they were divided about this previously, and it caused a lot of mayhem, and happy to have anything that just puts chaos into the conversation, into the dialogue. But I think Democrats are well aware that if they're going to have success in 2026, it's going to come down to connecting to voters about the economy and about inflation, about connecting in the right position as it relates to immigration, understanding that this was a concern for voters last cycle and, it's taken them time to get there. And yet also the nuance between how far Trump has taken and the kind of sweet spot in terms of addressing legal immigration versus immigration generally. And so I really think that going ahead into 2026, you're going to see Democrats looking ahead to these big picture issues and having to avoid the pitfalls, because crime is an issue that has been one that's harder for Democrats to message on compared to Republicans, and something that they need to figure out, given Trump's ability to control the national dialogue around these things.
Chad, finally, Speaker Johnson has pulled a lot of legislative rabbits out of his hat along the way here, even with a very slim majority. As you look at this funding, now it seems the White House is pushing for, extending this funding until end of January. He's got some landmines ahead, but minus the losses that you say might be coming, can he navigate on this playing field, or is it getting really tough?
Each time we say that, it gets a little bit tougher, and he kind of moves to the next level. There was a movie called The Game of Death that Bruce Lee made with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think I've talked about this before, and the idea is that you go up each level at this pagoda, and you're fighting at a different level and a different and more challenging opponent. And Mike Johnson, certainly, rises each level in the pagoda here. Yes, I think there's something to that. But that said, that mathematics, I talked to a couple of Republican senators earlier today, and they were just adamant that there would not be a government shutdown. And I can give you a host of reasons as to why there probably would be. A, when they tend to have government shutdowns, people are all resolved that they're not going to have it, and then they stumble into them because they can't change the parliamentary physics, which is the math I've been talking about. Number two, Democrats really have to just put up a fight. And there was this op-ed by Ezra Klein in the New York Times, who basically advocated for a government shutdown over the weekend and insisted that Democrats really kind of gave things up in March, and now they really have to show that they're fighting right now. You don't know where some Republicans come down, and if Republicans can't provide the votes, I can hear it already. Hakeem Jeffries will say, well, we thought that Republicans were awarded this big, historic majority in this election. You guys are in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House. You guys figure it out. Number four, we haven't had a government shutdown since 1819. And what that tells me is that we're due. And number five, as I say, we have been down to this road before with the president where they thought everything has been set. And I just gave you two examples earlier where everything was set. And the night before the vote, everything changed and they had to go back and recalibrate. The House and Senate are supposed to be out of session the week after next. They are supposed to come back on that Monday immediately before the government shutdown. That is a very tight turning radius, and that's how sometimes you stumble into a government shutdown.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem, Katie, that the government shutdown threat is something that the White House is that worried about. I think it'll fall to Democrats if it goes down that road.
Yeah, the White House is pretty confident they can, just given the amount of unity within the Republican Party, even with the increasing math on the Democratic side, that they can make sure that they get their ducks in a row. And if Democrats want to shut down the government when they have repeatedly for years claimed that government shutdowns hurt the economy, hurt the working class, threaten Social Security checks, et cetera, that if they want to go down this road, they can try. But last time Chuck Schumer tried this, he walked right up to the brink and realized the politics of it didn't work out. And going into the midterm elections, Democrats don't want to be held responsible for being the party that shuts down the government one way or the other.
Last thing, Carly, I think the president heads to New York and the Yankees game, I think, on the 11th, on September 11th. He has been intimately involved in talking about the New York mayor's race, where Zohran Mamdani is definitely in the lead in that Democratic race, but facing Andrew Cuomo and currently the current mayor. Where do you think that falls politically? Do you think that Democrats fear the Mamdani mayor win as much as Republicans talk about it?
I think that many in the Democratic Party are concerned that it would be a sign that the party is moving farther left, which is not going to be helpful for the party come 2026. I think there's also the belief, though, that this is a very specific and unique situation in a city that is obviously farther left than the general voting population, a multi-candidate race, complicated dynamics with every single candidate that's involved between, a very unpopular mayor who, is still trying to hold on, Governor Cuomo, obviously, who had already lost the primary. And, I think that, and obviously every time that Trump steps in or it comes out that, he's having conversations, it only makes things worse for Democrats. But I think that you still have Kathy Hochul as the governor of the state, who can and probably will be a check and balance on Mamdani if he's elected. And I think that's why you see that there's distance that party leaders in the Democratic Party have kept in terms of their endorsement of Mamdani. And so they're wary about the impact that this is going to have, but I think there's also the ability to let it be a specific instance and not something that takes over the perceptions of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and Republicans, Katie, can't wait to have more of this.
Yeah, they are happy to turn the support for Mamdani, especially if he wins, into a national issue ahead of the midterm elections. And certainly they're happy to point out that the energy in the Democratic Party is on the very far left, while the results of the most recent national election pushed basically the entire country to the right on basic issues. And when it comes to the crime issue, you have Mamdani just this week saying he wanted to get rid of the gang unit in New York City. So while people are supportive of cracking down on crime, you have one of the lefts in the Democratic Party's leading new candidates and darlings, which they have already taken to Washington, D.C. to make the rounds on Capitol Hill. So his stops have not just been in New York, to point out that this is really where the Democratic Party is, and to encourage voters to vote for the opposite.
All right, panel, thanks so much. Now for a bit of history. On September 9th, 1976, Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic of China, died in Beijing at 82. Mao rose to power after leading the Communist Party to victory in the Chinese Civil War, later establishing a one-party state in 1949. Under his rule, China underwent sweeping changes from land reforms and rapid industrialization to controversial campaigns like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, both of which led to intense turmoil and millions of deaths in China. Mao's legacy can still be seen in the current Chinese government, which wields authoritarianism, censorship, and state dominance to keep its domestic population in line. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Katie, Carly, and Chad, I'm Brett Baer. We'll see you next time. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.